She crossed her arms before I even finished my sentence. I had barely gotten the words out, quietly, calmly, the way I always speak, when she cut me off, tilted her head slightly to the side, and looked at me the way certain people look at you when they have already decided you are not worth the full weight of their attention. "Nobody gets special treatment here," she said. Her voice was flat and loud enough that the people sitting in the rows of plastic chairs behind me could hear every word. "Sit down and wait like everybody else." I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself again. I simply nodded, turned around, and found an empty seat near the window. I sat down. I put my bag on my lap. I looked at my hands, and I waited. The waiting room was full. Fluorescent lights hummed above us. A child across the room was crying softly. A television mounted high on the wall was playing a news channel with the sound turned low. The smell of antiseptic and floor cleaner hung in the air the way it always does in hospitals. That particular smell that means something serious is happening somewhere nearby, even when the surface of things looks routine. I sat in that chair for 11 minutes. I know because I checked my watch when I sat down and checked it again when the main doors at the far end of the corridor swung open. And the man who walked through them changed everything in that room without saying a single word. Before I tell you what happened next, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what country you're watching from. Now, let's begin. My name is Catherine Ellison. I am 38 years old. I am a physician. I have been practicing medicine for 11 years, the last 6 of which I have spent as a specialist in internal medicine at a private practice in Boston, Massachusetts. I grew up in a small town in rural Georgia called Harlan Creek. Population just under 4,000. 1 stoplight. 1 pharmacy. 1 doctor who covered the entire county and drove 40 minutes each way to reach patients who couldn't come to him. His name was Dr. Raymond Okafor, and he was the reason I became a doctor. I was 11 years old the first time I watched Dr. Okafor work. My grandmother, Mabel Ellison, had been having chest pain for 2 days and hadn't told anyone because she didn't want to be a burden. When my mother finally found out and called Dr. Okafor, he arrived at our house within the hour. He was calm, thorough, and completely unhurried. He sat at my grandmother's kitchen table and talked to her for 20 minutes before he even opened his bag. He asked about her sleep, her appetite, her stress. He treated her like her entire life was relevant information, like she mattered in every dimension. My grandmother was fine, minor muscle strain from lifting, but I never forgot the way Dr. Okafor made her feel seen, like she was not a problem to be processed, like she was a person to be understood. I decided that night that I wanted to do what he did. It took everything I had to get there. My family had no money for medical school. I applied for every scholarship I could find, took on significant loans, and worked part-time jobs through my undergraduate years at Georgia State and then through my first 2 years of medical school at Emory. There were nights when I was so tired I could barely read my own notes. There were moments when I genuinely did not know if I was going to make it through, but I kept going. I kept going because of my grandmother sitting at that kitchen table, because of Dr. Okafor pulling up a chair, because of the version of medicine I had decided at 11 years old that I believed in. I graduated from Emory School of Medicine in the top 12% of my class. I completed my residency at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. I built a practice from the ground up over 6 years. I published 2 papers in peer-reviewed journals. I taught seminars at a teaching hospital twice a year. I was not famous. I was not flashy. I was just a doctor who took her work seriously and showed up every single day. None of that was visible when I walked into Hargrove Memorial Hospital on a Wednesday morning in February wearing a wool coat and carrying a tote bag and looking, to anyone who glanced at me for half a second, like just another person in a waiting room. I want to explain why I was there because it matters. 3 weeks earlier, I had received a phone call from a man named Thomas Whitfield. He was the chief of staff at Hargrove Memorial, a mid-sized private hospital in downtown Boston with an excellent reputation for its cardiac and internal medicine departments. Thomas and I had met twice at medical conferences over the years and maintained a professional acquaintance. He called to tell me that the hospital's owner, a man named Arthur Pendleton, was looking to expand the hospital's internal medicine consulting program. They wanted to bring in 3 senior outside consultants to work with their existing team on complex cases, curriculum development for their residency program, and long-term departmental strategy. Thomas said my name had come up more than once in conversations with Arthur Pendleton directly. He asked if I would be willing to come in for an informal visit, not a formal interview, just a walkthrough of the department, a meeting with a few of the senior staff, and a conversation with Arthur himself. I said yes. We agreed on a Wednesday morning. Thomas told me to arrive at the main entrance at 9:30 and ask for him at the front desk. What Thomas did not know, and what I had no reason to tell him, was that he had been called into an emergency surgery that morning at 8:15. His assistant had tried to reach me but used an old email address that I no longer checked regularly. So when I arrived at 9:25 at the main entrance of Hargrove Memorial, there was no one expecting me at the front desk. I walked to the reception window and explained the situation to the woman behind the glass. She was polite and looked up Thomas Whitfield's name, confirmed he was in surgery, and suggested I take a seat in the waiting area while she tried to reach his assistant. That was when the nurse appeared. Her name tag said Sandra Price, RN. She was somewhere in her late 40s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the energy of someone who had decided a long time ago that efficiency mattered more than courtesy. She was walking past the reception desk when she overheard me explaining the situation. She stopped. She turned toward me fully and looked me over once with that particular, practiced kind of look, the kind that takes in everything about a person's appearance and uses it to make a rapid calculation about how much of their story is worth believing. I was wearing a long wool coat, dark green. No white coat. No badge. No lanyard. Nothing that would immediately signal to a stranger what I did for a living. Just a woman in a coat with a tote bag, standing at a hospital reception desk saying she had a meeting with the chief of staff. Sandra Price crossed her arms. "What kind of meeting?" she asked. Her tone was not curious. It was interrogating. "A professional one?" I said. "I'm a physician. Dr. Whitfield invited me to visit the internal medicine department. He's in surgery this morning, so there may be a mix-up with the scheduling." She tilted her head. "A physician." "Yes." She looked at me again. The same slow, calculating look. "Where's your ID?" "I don't have hospital credentials here," I said. "I'm not on staff. I'm an outside consultant. I was invited by Dr. Whitfield and by Arthur Pendleton." The moment I said Arthur Pendleton's name, something shifted in Sandra Price's face. Not softening, the opposite, a kind of tightening, like the name had annoyed her rather than given her pause. "Arthur Pendleton," she repeated, and there was something in her voice that I recognized immediately. The specific tone of someone who has heard people use an important name before as a way of bypassing process and has learned to be immune to it. She uncrossed her arms only to put her hands flat on the reception counter. "Nobody gets special treatment here," she said, loudly and clearly, pitching her voice in a way that carried. "I don't care who you say you have a meeting with. Sit down and wait like everybody else." Several people in the waiting area looked up. A young man near the wall glanced between us. The woman at the reception window looked down at her keyboard. I looked at Sandra Price for one moment. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not reach into my tote bag for the printed email confirmation I was carrying, or for my medical license, or for the business card Thomas Whitfield had mailed me with the appointment details written on the back. I did not do any of that. I simply said, "All right." And I turned around and found a seat near the window. 11 minutes. That is how long I sat there. I know because I watched the clock above the reception desk and because I had a follow-up call scheduled for 10:15 that I was going to need to step outside for. I sat with my bag on my lap and looked at my hands and let the waiting room move around me the way waiting rooms do. The quiet shuffling, the distant sounds of the hospital beyond the double doors, the low murmur of the television, the child who had stopped crying and was now asleep against his mother's shoulder. I was not thinking about Sandra Price. I had encountered Sandra Price before, in different hospitals, in different cities, wearing different name tags. I had learned a long time ago that the most exhausting thing you can do in those moments is let them pull you into their version of the story. I had my own version. I knew who I was. And in my experience, the truth has a way of arriving without any help from me. I had been sitting for 11 minutes, when the main doors at the far end of the corridor swung open. Arthur Pendleton was 61 years old, 6 feet tall, with silver hair cut close and the deliberate, unhurried walk of someone who had built something significant and knew it. He was wearing a dark suit and no tie. He was not surrounded by assistants or flanked by security. He was alone, walking at a measured pace down the center of the corridor, and he was looking directly at me. He had recognized me from a photograph Thomas Whitfield had sent him ahead of the visit. He had arrived at the hospital early that morning, been told by his own assistant about the surgery mix-up, and come down to the main entrance personally to find me. He crossed the waiting room without breaking stride, extended his hand before he had fully stopped walking, and said, with genuine warmth, "Dr. Ellison, Arthur Pendleton, I am so sorry about the confusion this morning." I stood and shook his hand. "Not at all, Mr. Pendleton. Thank you for coming down." "Please," he said, "it's Arthur." The waiting room was very quiet. I was aware of it the way you become aware of a room when its atmosphere changes. A shift in the air, a collective stillness, the sense of many people recalibrating what they are watching. Arthur Pendleton turned. He had seen what happened. His assistant had told him, and he had walked past Sandra Price's station on his way across the room. He stopped now and looked at her directly, not with anger, not with theater, with the specific, measured attention of a man who had run institutions for 30 years and understood that how a moment like this was handled would be remembered by everyone in the room. Sandra Price had taken one step back. Her arms, which had been crossed again, dropped to her sides. The expression she had used on me, that flat, certain, dismissive expression, was completely gone. What replaced it was something more complicated, confusion, and the beginning of understanding arriving at the same time. Arthur Pendleton spoke to her calmly and without raising his voice. "This woman," he said, "is Dr. Catherine Ellison. She is one of the most accomplished internists in New England. She published research last year that our own residency program uses as a teaching reference. She was invited to this hospital personally by me and by Dr. Whitfield to discuss a consulting engagement that would benefit every patient and every staff member in this building." He paused for just a moment. "She has been sitting in this waiting room for 11 minutes after being told to sit down and wait." Sandra Price opened her mouth slightly. Nothing came out. "I want you to think," Arthur Pendleton continued, his voice still even, still completely controlled, "about what it means for this hospital, for the standard we hold ourselves to, for the reputation we have spent decades building. When a physician of Dr. Ellison's caliber walks through our doors and is treated the way you treated her this morning." The waiting room was absolutely silent. The television was still on. The ventilation system was still humming. But everything human in that room had gone completely still. Sandra Price looked at me. For the first time since our exchange at the reception desk, she looked at me without the calculation, without the assessment, without the armor. Just looked at me. And I watched something move across her face that I recognized. The slow, sinking recognition of a person who has understood, fully and finally, that they were wrong. Not wrong in a small way. Wrong in a way that was witnessed. Wrong in a way that will sit with a person for a very long time. She started. Arthur Pendleton waited. "I apologize," Sandra Price said. Her voice was quiet. The loudness she had used earlier was entirely gone. "Dr. Ellison, I apologize." I looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," I said. That was all. Not because I felt nothing, but because there are moments when the most powerful thing available to you is simplicity. 2 words. Eye contact. And then moving forward. Arthur Pendleton walked me through the internal medicine department himself. He introduced me to 4 senior physicians, 2 of whom I had corresponded with by email and never met in person. Thomas Whitfield emerged from surgery at 11:15 and joined us for the last part of the tour, still in his scrubs, still apologizing about the morning. "Stop," I told him. "It's fine." I found a seat. He laughed at that, a little uncomfortably. The conversation with Arthur Pendleton lasted most of the afternoon. We talked about the consulting program, the residency curriculum, the specific gaps in the department's approach to complex multi-system cases that he felt an outside perspective could help address. He was sharp, specific, and genuinely curious. He asked good questions and listened carefully to the answers. He reminded me, in certain ways, of Dr. Okafor sitting at my grandmother's kitchen table in Harlan Creek all those years ago. That particular quality of attention that makes a person feel like what they have to say actually matters. At the end of the afternoon, as his assistant was scheduling a follow-up, Arthur Pendleton walked me to the elevator. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Of course." "This morning, in the waiting room." He paused. "You didn't say anything. You just sat down." "Yes," I said. "Why?" I thought about it for a moment. "Because arguing in that moment wouldn't have told her anything she was ready to hear," I said. "And the truth was going to arrive regardless." He looked at me for a moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "It was." The elevator doors opened. I stepped in. "We'll be in touch, Dr. Ellison," he said. "I'll look forward to it," I said. The doors closed. I signed a 2-year consulting agreement with Hargrove Memorial Hospital 6 weeks later. It was the most significant professional engagement of my career to that point. I have been working with their team for 4 months now. The residency curriculum project alone has already affected the training of 31 young physicians. I think about that waiting room sometimes, about the 11 minutes, about the plastic chair near the window, and the sleeping child across the room, and the television no one was watching, about Sandra Price crossing her arms and pitching her voice so the whole room could hear. And I think about what my mother used to tell me when I was growing up in Harlan Creek, in that small house with the 1 stoplight and the 40-minute drive to the county doctor. She used to say, "Catherine, you let your work do your talking, because work doesn't have an accent. Work doesn't have a color. Work just stands there and speaks for itself, and nobody can argue with it." I have carried that with me through every examination room, every conference, every waiting room, every moment when someone looked at me and saw something other than what I actually am. You do not always need to explain yourself. You do not need to defend yourself. You do not need to raise your voice or produce your credentials or convince the room. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is sit down, put your bag on your lap, look at your hands, and wait. Because the truth, in my experience, does not need your help to arrive. It only needs enough time.